star in multilingualism and ethno-linguistic minorities in London, and especially has done extensive research in Greek Cypriot community in London, and is looking how a language maintenance and shift, intergenerational transmission, and how these things are affected by ideologies about monolingualism, ideologies about standard and non-standard varieties, community schools, and really he's a rising star in multilingualism. And I'm not the one by saying that. This is the, he has been awarded the Rising Star Scholarship from the British Academy, and he's been prolific in his community engagement work. So he's been awarded a lot of funding from Art and Humanity Research Council, British Academy, Leverhulme, and most recently joined a project that Petros and I will start doing together, that has been generously funded by our faculty's research fund, and also by Westminster University, where we'll be collecting and curating the vocabulary of the Greek Cypriot community in London. So we'll start that soon. But that's the next phase. So
thank you, Anna. Thank you for this introduction. I don't know if I can live up to this expectation just this afternoon, but thank you for coming on a Friday. So the work I'm going to present to you today comes from a number of different projects that I did, funded by the British Academy that Anna mentioned. So I'm going to start with placing what I do in the wider London context. So you will have heard, I'm sure, the term melting pot to refer to London. And this is a kind of description of the fact that London is one of the most multilingual, multicultural cities in the world. So these are some newspaper headings. So London, Europe's new ethnic melting pot. London is a melting pot. We should keep it this way. Although I would like to say that I don't really like this term, because what it implies for me is that London is just a big pot that you put stuff in it, and then when you bring it to the right temperature, the stuff melts and it loses its individual characteristics, and what comes out is something where you can't really tell what went into the pot. So I prefer the term linguistic mosaic, not only because it's a Greek word and Greek people are raised with the idea that all words are Greek and Greek words express the world better than other languages. Of course I don't believe that, but in this case I do believe that this is a more appropriate term, because what is a mosaic is just a collection of smaller elements that each of them put together a nice picture, like this one you see here in a mosaic from Corinth from the 2nd century of the Common Era. So London is truly a multicultural, multilinguistic mosaic. We know that between 200 and 300 languages are spoken by London's pupils. We can talk a little bit about why this range between 200 and 300. It depends on what you count to be a language and what you don't count to be a language, and who's doing the counting and what criteria they use in sort of identifying individual named languages. And why London's pupils? This is because this is the most sort of reliable metric that we have, because we base this on the London school census. So the London schools have to declare the languages of their pupils, and this is much better than the census. There is a lot of discussion in the linguistics community about the language question of the 2011 census and why it wasn't appropriate to capture the linguistic diversity in the UK in a reliable manner. Of those languages, 40 are spoken by more than 1,000 pupils, and if you think that each pupil needs to have at least one parent, but they might of course have two parents, extended families, brothers and sisters, you can gauge a little bit the linguistic diversity in London. These are the top 15 languages that are spoken other than English in London in the years 1999 and 2008. Greek is on there. In the year 1999, it was the 11th most spoken language other than English. By 2008, it had moved further down into this table. We see Bengali and Sylheti sort of topping the table. Other languages of the former British colonial territories, Urdu, Punjabi, Gujarati, being high on this table. So London presents us with an extraordinary linguistic variety. We have a very large number of different homelands with differences in their historical connections to the UK. So for example, Cyprus, that I'm going to be talking about today, has historical connections with the UK. It was part of the British Empire. My own home country, Greece, has less strong historical connections. Greece was never part of the British Empire. It was like a third country, so obviously this plays a role. The Greek Cypriot community is much larger in the UK than the Greek community, for example. We have differences in the nature of migration, so the reasons why people migrate to London and the UK. Is it in search of better socioeconomic conditions, such as work? People might be fleeing war, or we might have the more sort of cosmopolitan type of migrant, someone who has the possibility and option to move abroad to study at university, for example, or to look for a better job. And of course the timing of migration, when migration happens, how far back in history migration goes. So depending on the timing of migration, different communities will be what we call more older and more established communities, and they might have been in London for 1, 2, 3, even 4 generations, or we can have more recently arrived communities. So for example, the post-2004 EU countries, the 10 countries that entered the European Union in 2004, have experienced a much more recent growth in their migrant population in the UK. And of course these are related in different ways with the degree of heritage language maintenance, so how well these communities maintain their languages in time. So we have the so-called 3-generation language shift model, where the first generation preserve the language or languages of the home country, the second generation is bilingual in the home language and the host country language, and by the third generation we have what we call the shift to English. So the third generation will be mostly monolingual in English, or will have a low proficiency. This is a very broad picture. Of course, there are individual variations, and we know that some communities tend to preserve their languages better for longer than other communities. So again, totally anecdotally, the Greek community from Greece seems to be preserving Greek for much longer than the Greek Cypriot community has in the past. I don't have an answer to why that is. Maybe we can look at it in the future. Now, this is just a very broad picture, but when we start looking more closely, we identify a much more complex picture than the one we already described. So we know as linguists that all languages have different varieties, different dialects if you want, defined in terms of geographical factors or social factors like age, gender, or socioeconomic status. So for example, if we take Arabic, ethnologue and online linguistic resource lists Arabic not as a language but as a macro language with 30 individual languages. So for example, we have Algerian Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, Gulf Arabic, Levantine Arabic, Moroccan Arabic, and it makes sense if you consider the space in which Arabic is spoken from Morocco and the west of Africa all the way to Iraq and the Gulf states in the east. You see the different variations, and it's only natural for linguists that a language will be spoken in different forms and guises in this territory, so it's not surprising to us that an Arabic speaker from Morocco will not understand an Arabic speaker from Iraq or the Gulf states. So they will claim for ideological reasons that they both speak Arabic, but for linguistic reasons they count as different languages if we go by structural and the mutual intelligibility criterion. Of course, this diversity variation is largely disregarded in multilingual settings. So even now in London, even if we know as linguists the languages come in very many different forms and varieties, we still talk about community languages using very broad brush labels like Arabic, Bengali, Greek, Somali, Turkish, Urdu, and so on and so forth. In the case that we're talking today, we know at least two varieties of Greek are spoken in London: the Greek from Greece and the Greek from Cyprus. And this is interesting because we know, and there is a lot of evidence to show that community languages in diasporic settings basically naturally reflect the diversity found in the countries of origin of their speakers. Yeah, it's not surprising that the people who migrate bring with them their languages as well. Yeah, they don't leave their languages behind. So the different ethno-linguistic minorities present in the UK do not only or necessarily speak the standard language of their homelands. They, in very many cases, they speak regional varieties, non-standard varieties, dialects from where they come from. And in many cases, in the countries of origin, the use of these linguistic varieties, so a standard versus a dialect, is often mediated by language ideologies that index relations of power and equality. So we have, in each case, a variety that is labeled the good, the proper, the standard, the correct variety, and another variety of varieties that are labeled to be improper, incorrect, in any case inferior to the standard. So that's what happens in the countries of origin, but these ideas and also associations between these ideas and expectations about the non-linguistic characteristics of individuals who use them are transplanted as a result of migration. Those non-linguistic expectations are basically ideas like, oh, if you speak like that, it means that you're not educated, you're not polite, you don't have a high socioeconomic status. These are basically non-linguistic characteristics of speakers, but they are indexed through their use of language. So if someone speaks a standard variety, they'll be perceived as being educated, well-mannered, well-versed, intelligent, polite. If they speak the non-standard variety, they will be deemed to be the opposite. So these ideas are transplanted in migratory settings. We know that this is happening. By first-generation migrants, by the same token as other elements of homeland culture. Yeah, they bring their languages and they bring their ideas about their languages. So what happens in these diasporic settings is that these norms are transmitted to new generations of speakers. Yeah, so the parents will transmit these ideas to their children, and within the communities that they set up, that they establish in the diasporic setting, there will be new structures that sort of reproduce these ideologies. In our case, for example, it's very the role of community schools is very important in reproducing ideas about correct and incorrect language in the diaspora, yeah? Not in the mainstream education, but in the diaspora. So, second generation speakers are also exposed to these in multiple settings in the community, but at the same time, they grow up in a larger and a wider English-speaking context. So they basically amalgamate these ideas about language that they are exposed to in the community with the ideas about language that they're exposed to in wider society. So those homeland language ideologies take new shapes in diasporas as speakers variably reproduce. Some of them contest them, and in any case, they very often transform them. So this is what I'm going to be showing to you today, how diversity in diaspora is placed in a new context, where both the standard and the non-standard form of the home language lose symbolic capital. So if you come, for example, from Cyprus and you speak Cypriot Greek, but also Standard Greek, both of these varieties in the UK context are less important than English, yeah? Because English is the majority language. Back in Cyprus, Standard Greek is more valuable than Cypriot Greek, but in the diaspora context, both of these varieties lose out. They're both put under pressure from the majority language, in our case English, but within this new ecology, the non-standard form is further minoritized and always loses out. So we can conceptualize these ideas using this this figure here. So on the top you have the majority language sort of preferences or prestige hierarchy. So the standard variety is more important, is more prestigious, it's considered to be more valuable than the non-standard variety. And at the bottom you have the heritage language, the home language. So within that domain as well, you have a ranking, a relative hierarchy of standard and non-standard, and you see how the standard heritage language is still less important than the standard variety of the majority language. So moving on to the case study, I've already mentioned the two varieties that are going to be talking about today. So Cypriot Greek, this refers to the modern Greek varieties that are spoken in Cyprus, alongside Cypriot varieties of other languages, Cypriot, most notably Cypriot Turkish, but also Cypriot Arabic, also known as Sanna, and Cypriot Romani, also known as Rubecha. And on the other hand, we have the standard variety of Greek, which is the official language of the Hellenic Republic, aka Greece, and also one of the two official languages of the Republic of Cyprus, the other one being Standard Turkish. So Cypriot Greek was traditionally divided into 18 regional varieties. So traditional dialectological studies from the 70s identified those 17 different areas. So I know a few of you might be able to read the Greek here. So for example, we have Katsareas, which is the main area in the center where the Katsareas is. We have a lot of differentiation in the Paphos area. We have the Katsareas area in the north. But this picture is no longer thought to be accurate because we know that after the 70s and the 1974 war, there was a move of urbanization. More people moved to the 6 cities of Cyprus. There were, of course, internal movements of populations, which led to what linguists call a leveling of intradialectal differences. So those lines are no longer as visible today. So a number of researchers have identified the emergence of what we call a Cypriot Greek koine, like a common variety, and this is still ongoing. Now, I'm going to briefly mention that the two varieties of Greek, Cypriot Greek and Standard Greek, are very different from each other. If someone is from Greek and someone else is from Cyprus, it takes them a split second to basically identify that the other person is not from where they come themselves. It's very differences are very visible across all levels of linguistic analysis. So, for example, phonology, Cypriot Greek has those ch, j, and sh sounds that Standard Greek does not have. In morphology, many words in Cypriot Greek end in an n. That's very audible to a speaker from Greece speaking the Standard. And of course we have lexical differences, including words that are completely different, like thoro for to see versus vlepo, but also false friends, words that have the same form but mean different things. So sidetiras in Cyprus is a stapler, but in Greece it's a paperclip. Now, how these two varieties are perceptualized in Cyprus is driven to a certain extent, or to a large extent actually, by an idea that Cyprus is an unredeemed part of the imagined community of Hellenism, that basically Cyprus is a Greek land. The center of this imagined community of Hellenes, of Greek people all over the world, is Greece, although historically we know that the center moves. So before 1453, the center of Hellenism was Constantinople, now Istanbul, but then of course that became Greece. So the idea is that this imagined community is bound by common descent, and of course the descent comes from ancient Greece, common culture, common traditions, including Greek Orthodox religion, and Greek language. So Greek language is what is thought to unite Greek people around the world, regardless of where they live. And of course there can be only one correct Greek language, and that is the one that comes from Greece, and especially its capital, Athens. Just to visually show you this relation between Greece and Cyprus, I have found here the map of the area. So this is from the Parliament of Greece. Yeah, it says Vouli των Ελλήνων. It's a Greek parliament in Greece, in Athens. And the heading there says Ιστορικός χάρτης της Ελλάδος, which means a historical map of Greece. And you see different areas colored differently, and over each area you see a date. So the southern part of Greece here in yellow is the first part of that became independent. So the first independent Greek state was established here in 1832. So that's in yellow. Then the next territory that was added were the Ionian Islands in 1864, Thessaly in 1881, and so on and so forth. Lands that used to be part of Greece for a short while but were no longer part of Greece are shown here in this striped bit. And then we have territories that are not Greek, that are white. So Albania, Northern Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Turkey. So what is the color of Cyprus? Why is it colored? It is colored. It's not as bright as the mainland Greece territories, and it doesn't have a date because it was never part of Greece. Yeah, it never joined, never united with Greece. But why is it included in a historical map of Greece? A map published by the Greek Parliament. Yeah, it is because there is this ideology that Cyprus is somehow part of Hellenism, But it's interesting that other areas in this map that are also considered to be part of that Hellenic community, like northern Petros here, is not coloured, because that belongs to Albania. So it shows you the kind of relation that sometimes people who are not familiar with this area will find baffling, and you might still find it baffling. So, oh no, you can't see them. So here I had ticks and X's that show you where the two varieties are used in Cyprus. So Standard Greek is used for all purposes has an official status. Cypriot Greek has no official status in Cyprus. Standard is used in administration, education. It's the one that's codified and standardized. It's the one that is used in the writing and the media, although now this is changing. However, Cypriot Greek wins out because it's the one variety that is naturally acquired by the population in Cyprus as a first language at home. So Standard Greek has all those official sort of credentials, and I've got this cool emoji here because I want to show you that it's actually becoming more and more cool to write in Cypriot Greek. This is by no means a new practice. So this is the first page of a medieval historical work by Leontios Macheras, the recital concerning the sweet land of Cyprus. It was produced somewhere at the beginning of the 15th century, and it was written in the Cypriot dialect of the time. So this is one of the actually major works in medieval Greek literature that was produced entirely in Cypriot dialect. So if you're familiar with what the ideas that exist here in London in the Cypriot community, one idea is that you can't write Cypriot. Actually you can, and people have been writing it for centuries. Of course, much later, these are some very famous verses in a poem by Vasilis Michailidis between the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, where he wrote this very famous verse, "Η Ρωμιοσύνη φίλης η νότσια του κόσμου," meaning the Greeks are erased as old as the world. Of course, the poem is in Cypriot Greek. Much more recently, this is a picture from the urban landscape of Nicosia. Someone has graffitied on this wall the phrase "gismo" in Cypriot Greek, which means "touch me." And this is one bit of Cypriot that a person from Greece wouldn't understand at all what this phrase means. Gismo, it's very, very different. And of course, with the advent of computer-mediated communication, there is a lot more Cypriot Greek being used in writing, most of the time using the Latin alphabet instead of the Greek alphabet that's very ideologically laden as the correct one. So here you have a little spat between two lovers. So where are you? None of your business. What got into you? Go see that more and liked all your pics on Facebook. Yeah, να πάει να δεις τι φτάνει που σου έκαμε like όλες τις pics στο Facebook. So people do use it. And in much more recent times, there was this short, brief period in Cyprus at the beginning of this decade, where Cypriot Greek experienced a sort of how can I say it? Απενοχοποίηση, how can I say it in English? Like you don't feel guilty when you use it, yeah? So this was from an article published in City Free Press that says this in Cypriot Greek με το ελληνικά, εν εννοούμε μόνο τα ελλαδίτικα, αλλά και τα κυπριακά. So present day Cypriot Greek printed in a major press in Nicosia. So this idea that it's not used in writing, it does not hold any water at all. So, oh again my bit here didn't come out. So this relation between the two varieties has often been described in terms of Ferguson's notion of diglossia. So you have the high code, Standard Greek, which you use in the parliament, university lecture, conversation with friends, so on and so forth. Cypriot Greek is a low code, so you use that with conversations and folk literature. But more recently, there is this idea that actually the two varieties do not stand in such a binary relation. Actually, what you have is a continuum of registers. Yeah, so basically different levels of refinement of speech. On the one hand, and you have basilectal registers, a sort of style of speech that has a lot of traditional Cypriot features, and this is labeled telia or vareta chorkatika, so total heavy peasantry. This is the most sort of the less prestigious register, but on the other end you have the Kalamaristika, the acrolectal register, the correct one, the one that approximates the standard in the closest way. And in between you have different registers called systarismena, sort of tidied up, or evgenika, so polite Cypriot. And the idea is that an individual speaker will move along this continuum depending on communicational and interactional factors, so who they're talking to, what the context is, what the topic is, how well they know the other person, what kind of identity and message they want to negotiate about themselves. So if they want to negotiate sort of a more traditional or a more sort of relaxed idea, the ideas that might move towards here. If it's a more formal or polite occasion, that might move towards there. But these are not just registers of language, and they're also associated with other non-linguistic characteristics of speakers, yeah? So, Chorkatica is not just the way you speak, it can also be what you do. So there's this page on Twitter called Chorkatica. It is Villagey 2. So if you go in it every now and then, there's a tweet that says it's Villagey 2, drive in your van without a shirt. So that's what village people do. It's also, and one of the tweets from 2000 was this. So it's Villagey 2, do that. Yeah. So the person who does that fills the back of their van. This has a specific word in Cypriot Greek, the glokambino. So if you fill the back of it with water on a hot summer's day, and you go in with your friend and eat watermelon, then you are a chorkatos. Yeah, you are a peasant, and most likely you will be speaking using that very basilectal register of speech. So what are the attitudes in Cyprus? In Cyprus we know that Cypriot Greek is generally perceived to be as a rural, peasant-like and unappealing variety. So Pavlo and Pavlou identified that specifically those sounds, sh and j, are perceived as such because they don't exist in the standard. So they're very, very easy to spot that if the word has sh, it's Cypriot, and Cypriot is not polite, not correct Greek. And Pavlos Sophocleus also identified that this telia varietas chorkatica level is associated with a rude way of life, a low level of education, a lack of manners and sophistication, whereas standard Greek is associated with politeness. So what about the UK diaspora? How have these ideas been transplanted here? I don't know if you know these two guys. I've spoken to people and they don't know who they are. This is Stavros Flatley and his son. I think they won Britain's Got Talent, I don't remember when. It must be more than 10 years now.
I mean, the son is much slimmer.
Yeah, no, he's much slimmer, and I think he's in prison.
Exactly. They were in Celebrity Apprentice yesterday.
All right, okay. So the community, of course, is very large here. The census, being the way it is, doesn't capture really the size of the community, so it does ask people where they were born. So in 2011 there were around 82,000 residents in the UK who were born in Cyprus, but of course that only catches the third generation, not the second or the third generation, just the first. The National Federation of Cypriots in the UK gives this estimate between 200 and 300,000 people, which, if you put it in context that the whole of Cyprus is around 1 million, it's easy for you to gauge how big a percentage of the world's Cypriots are in the UK. And they tend to be concentrated in London, and especially those 5 northern London boroughs, so Camden, Islington, Haringey, Barnet and Enfield. And the history of the community is such that they first moved, settled in the the southern part of these boroughs, so around Camden and Islington. And as they became more established, they moved northwards, following the line of this bus. So the 29 bus goes from Camden Town to Holloway, Finsbury Park, Manor House, Turnpike Lane, Wood Green, and it used to terminate in Enfield, Palmer's Green. So it's basically, it coincides with the history of the Greek Cypriot diaspora, and I like to believe that these two guys here are most probably Greek Cypriot.
It was called it's called Green Lanes.
Yeah.
But it's often called Greek Lanes.
Oh, Greek Lanes, yeah. And Palmer's Greek, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, along those lanes, there's a lot of urban landscape presence. So this is a Kypriakon Kafenion, a Cypriot coffee house. I think it's closed, so I was lucky to take that picture a few years ago. In the diaspora, we find those three languages. Yeah, three elements in the ecology: Cypriot Greek, used with family members, friends, both in and outside the house. Of course, English, and we find this in increasing degrees with younger generations, so even used among British-born Greek Cypriots. And of course, the standard is used in all formal aspects of community life, like in schools, the church, or the media. And speaking of the media, well, I'll come back to the media later. So ideology is pretty much sort of reflects this primacy of the Greek language as a key element of the Greek Cypriot community here. So this is this is posted on the door of the Agi Pandas, the All Saints Cathedral in Camden. It's been there for quite some time, as we can see from the colour of the paper, and also how many times people have pinned things on top of it. And it says, parents, send your children to Greek school to learn the language, the religion, the history, and the tradition of our eternal race. So the Greek language and the fact that it's taught in Greek schools here in London is a very important aspect of how ideas and culture is transmitted to new generations of speakers here in London. The schools are overseen, managed by the Cyprus Educational Mission, an office of the Greek Cypriot Ministry of Education and Culture back in Cyprus, who have like a sort of curriculum that states that the aim of complementary education is the maintenance and cultivation of the Greek language, the religious, national and cultural identity, the acquaintance with the mores and customs of our home country, Cyprus. So how are these varieties used here? So they basically reproduce what we find in Cyprus in terms of the domains in which they are found. So these are two screenshots from the same show on Hellenic TV. So the presenter of a show called Omogenia Edo Londino, like Oparikia Edo Londino, like expert community, this is London. And then she speaks to introduce Fanula, a half-crazy aunt who lives in North London. And one of them speaks the standard variety, and the other one speaks Cypriot Greek. So I'll leave it to you to guess who speaks the standard and who speaks the dialect. Also, we see here the front page of a Greek newspaper published in London. It's called Eleftheria, meaning freedom. So all of it is entirely in the standard form, standard Greek, except for this one word here, chorkatos. Now, chorkatos refers back to this peasanty word that I used before. It means like a yoko, yeah? So it's here used to describe the president of Turkey, Erdogan. So it says agenis thrasis ke chorkatos, so a rude and insolent, a yoko, and it's the only word that's in Cypriot Greek, and it's put in those the Greek quotation marks, yeah, those signs. Why is it? It's not because it's an ironic use, it's not a quote, it's not because they don't believe that he's a chorkatos, but it's because it's a Cypriot word printed on the front page of the newspaper. So it indicates that the word is not where it's supposed to be, or that the newspaper is no place for Cypriot, but in this case we use it obviously because we're talking about the president of Turkey. So in terms of attitudes, early works identified positive attitudes towards Cypriot Greek in the community. Cypriot Greek was viewed by these studies as a symbol of ethnic identity, immigrant history, as a point of reference with a distinct culture. And these early works found that English and Greek are not competing in the community, but basically they fulfill different communicational needs. Now, Papa Pavlo and Pavlo even went as far as to say that there are no signs of negative attitudes towards Cypriot Greek, which UK Cypriots seem to master at higher levels than modern standard Greek. However, my research shows that this is not true. So negative ideas about the status, value and prestige of Cypriot Greek have been transplanted here in London. So the Cypriot Greek variety is described using negative labels that have been transplanted from Cyprus. So in an interview, we asked, you don't believe that Greek is better than Cypriot? No, only the village talk. The word, the chorkatika word, the villagey words. What does chorkatika mean? Why? I don't really like it. We learned kefali, kele. So these are three different words for head. So kele, the last one, is the one that's most prototypically Cypriot. Yeah, it doesn't exist in the standard language. It has sounds that don't exist in the standard language. Kefali is the standard form, and kefalin is a sort of in-between form. It has the ch sound from Cypriot and the n at the end, but it's not kele. And of these, she says, I don't agree with kele. She doesn't agree with the Cypriot word. I don't know what agree means. So she doesn't like it. She disowns. She doesn't want to, because it's horkatika, it's villagey. So these ideas that the Cypriot Greek forms are somehow of lesser value than the standard Greek forms have been transplanted here in London, and they are described using old labels and old ideas. So this other woman, she said, I don't say chehyo. Chehyo means speak to, but it has two very Cypriot words, basilecto Cypriot forms, che for and eyo for I. I don't say chehyo, let's put it that way. Why? Because that's not correct. Yes, but it's not an error. No, I'm a believer in speaking correctly. So why do people say it? It's laziness. Yeah? Laziness to describe the form of Cypriot Greek that people use. And of course the use of the standard is proper and polite, so Elia tells us that if I'm talking with someone from Greece, I feel that I too have to make the effort, let's say, to be polite and say ke instead of che. So this che sound, especially this word for and that's very frequent, has become sort of an indexical of how polite you are. If you say ke, you're polite. If you say che, you're not polite. But we also find novel labels that we don't encounter in Cyprus itself. So my was at school, they teach them Greek, proper Greek. What do you mean by proper Greek? Well, okay, Cypriot is a slang, really, of Greek. So that was very interesting for me, because I know that slang is not a term that is used to describe Cypriot in Cyprus. Yeah? In Cyprus, you don't call Cypriot Greek slang. You call it horkatika, you call it vareta, peasanty, heavy, but never slang. And in an in-class observation at a Greek school, we found that we captured this change. So the teacher says, sometimes we say jamais there for the Cypriot word for there. One student says, yeah. Another student says, yes, that's what I say. Third student, I don't say that. I say eki being the Greek, the standard word. Okay, eki, good. Well, we have to write it. And then she says, I don't say che. So she starts talking about all the Cypriot words that she says she doesn't say. Why don't you say che? Well, like Greek slang, they're Greek slang words, Greek slang. So then we discovered that there is a dedicated page on Facebook called Cypriot Slang. It was made by someone here in London, and it includes these very fancy posts of Cypriot words with their English translation. So mishimo, as if this Cypriot word doesn't exist in the standard, but it also includes words like masela for jaw, which are fine in the standard. I don't see coming from a standard Greek perspective, I don't see what slangy elements there are there in this word, because it's the word for jaw in Greece as well. So there's something interesting going on, because also we know, so what is slang? So it's very difficult to define. So Coleman has said that these are some ideas that have been put forward in explaining what slang is. So the meaning basically depends on the context. So what some people might call slang, other people might not call slang, so it's very context specific. But it tends to be informal language, non-standard language. It's strongly lexical, yeah, it refers to items, so you will have the proper correct item, and then you have the slang item for that proper word. It tends to be linguistically playful or creative, tends to be novel and short-lived, although not always. It's very useful in defining group identity, so people who know the slang and they speak it, so they index that they belong to that particular group of people, and they tend to be young urban speakers. But in all the literature, it's categorically stated that slang is not used that is geographically restricted. Yeah, it's not a variety of a particular area that qualifies as slang. And in Cyprus itself, there is this project called Slang, Cypriot Slang, where people upload their own slang terms, and there the linguists who made it, including Christodoulou and Katsareas, say that Cypriot Greek slang is distinct from the basilectal registers of the dialect. So Cypriot Greek slang is not horkatika. Both are to be avoided in proper speech, but slang is urban, and horkatika is rural. And when they enter Cypriot Greek slang, horkatika words lose their rural connotations and acquire new meanings. So in Cyprus, the relation between proper and improper is perceived along the line of rurality or urbanness. So if something is urban, is more proper, if something is rural, is horkatika. So how can we understand what happened here in London? So, tropes of slang is a notion from Asif Agha's work, who states that this refers to the class of metasemiotic process whereby speech repertoires come to be evaluated as deviant with respect to one or more presupposed standards. Yeah, so if something is deviant from a standard, it's labeled slang. When brought under slang formulations, including cases where speech habits perceived as deviant by one subgroup are renormalized in the speech of others, who invest these forms with distinct indexical values. So there's a very important process called enregistrement and re-enregistrement. These are processes in practice where performable signs, like words, become recognized and regrouped as belonging to a distinct, differentially valorized semiotic register by the population. So people identify uses of words, they identify some common features, both linguistic and non-linguistic, and they group them under new labels. So a register exists as a bound object only to a degree set by socio-historical processes of enregistrement, processes whereby its forms and values become differentiable from the rest of language for a given population of speakers. So what is the context that triggered this development here in the UK? So there is a lot of discussion about slang. So if you Google slang in the UK context, you get a lot of discussion, you get a lot of passionate ideas, and you get a lot of media items such as these ones. Slang banned from Croydon School to improve student speech. So the school, Harris Academy, Norwood, banned words like cause, like, ain't, bear, extra, in it, beginning sentences with basically and ending sentences with yeah. And you'll find a very interesting debate between Michael Rosen and the school teacher. Well, the school teacher basically tells that he asks his students not to use slang words. So to speak in slang but never to write in slang, because if you speak and write in slang, people will think you're not educated enough. So this is the context in which British-born Greek Cypriots are exposed to in mainstream society. Mainstream society tells them you can't write slang, you can't speak in slang. And then they go to the Greek school where they're exposed to a kind of teaching that tells them every time you're about to write something, don't add the N at the end of the word. This is one of the Cypriot characteristics before. When we speak, it's very natural, we can say it, but when you write it, you can't put this final N. So this idea about what you can say and what you can write gives this view that Cypriot Greek is something that you cannot write, but you can say. So what is it? It's slang. So there are these ideological schemata that have led to this re-enregistrement, properness. So these are excerpts from interviews that we've done. So standard Greek is the proper way to say it. If you go to like a really posh place and you say like chair, they won't really, it will be like, they don't talk like that if you go to Greece, or I wouldn't say that in a conversation. Correctness, Cypriot Greek just doesn't sound right. Since we have a Cypriot word and we have a Greek word, why should I learn a new word that's not correct? So we'll have to learn the standard word. Deviance from the standard, it's not official language, it's unofficial, it's not standard, but also important the English lens, the English viewpoint. So these are from, the three first quotes are from children in Greek schools. In English, the way to talk properly, it's by saying, I'm not talking slang, it's by talking properly. Like you say in it, by not dropping your T's. So you know, when you say water instead of water, so that will be che, and you say ke. So basically they formed an analogy between English perceptions of standard and good English and they've mapped this onto standard Greek and Cypriot Greek, and also this idea that people say chigya because they're lazy. This is an English ideology that slang or non-standard productions are basically the result of laziness, because this is no more lazy or no more effortful than saying kewo. So basically what we have is that in the diaspora here, the basilectal register of Cypriot Greek, known in the Cyprus context as Chorkatika, has been re-enregistered with a register of speech that is labeled Greek slang by British-born Greek Cypriots in terms of these ideological schemata of properness, correctness and deviance from the standard, as part of the development of their transnational identities and their experiences of non-standard English. So, to close, I've tried to show you that in this context, negative perceptions of Cypriot are both reproduced and transformed. So the Chorkatika label, the rural label is reproduced in the community, but the new generations have also transformed this and added the slang label. So the attachment of labels such as slang, lazy, or even broken, I didn't talk about it, reinforce the stigmatization of Cypriot Greek as an undesirable semiotic system. And mainstream and complementary education have worked towards achieving the same goal. And this is one of the rare instances where the mainstream school and the Saturday school have actually achieved the same outcome, which is the transmission of intolerant language ideologies. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Petros. Do we have any questions?
I would like to ask about the word horkatos.
Mhm.
When they used it in the newspaper, is it maybe, did they choose that specific word because maybe there wasn't a good enough equivalent in the standard Greek?
I mean, there is a one that doesn't sound very different, choriatis, which is horkatos. It's just that this horkatos label comes with all those non-linguistic features that Cypriot people will identify. Someone who's a horkatos will do this, will do that, will do this, will do that, they'll behave in this way. So in this case, you're right, that there was no better equivalent, so they had to use it. But because they had to use it in where it's not supposed to be used, they put it in those quotation marks. So, but you're right, I assume it's because they thought this is the best way to describe.
Serves its purpose, has a stronger meaning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was interested in your interpretation of how you illustrated Cypriot slang.
Mm-hmm.
I've come to know it as Pidgin Greek.
And I interview you for my project. I want to.
So I thought that was quite funny for me. And in our household, we never said chair. We said je, just J-E.
Yeah.
So I think that was
That's
very
just my pronunciation.
Right, okay. All right. I think it's quite interesting. There's so many variations. So I was fully familiar with everything you just described. It's just so funny to see it contextualized properly with research behind it. But it's funny to have actually lived it.
Yeah.
Can I say thank you very much? Actually, you've just captured the whole of my life, my ancestors' life and my
Yeah.
children's life in your research, and I'm delighted that the research has been done actually, and compliments on your variation of accents and dialects. But I mean, just thinking about my own experience, many-fold, that's why I was sitting smiling a lot and acknowledging what you were saying. So, my mum was born here of Greek Cypriot descent when there was no North London Greek Cypriot in it culture at the time. She speaks totally different to myself. I was brought up in the culture when community language schools first opened, and just like in the film The Big Fat Greek Wedding, we all hated going. And then we grew up and sent our children to the same community language schools and they hated going. My husband is a Greek Cypriot who moved to mainland Greece after the Turkish invasion in 1974, and there was a lot of stigma for him and his brothers when they moved, with teachers not including them, thinking they were delinquents. They've gone on to be Aristouli in their own right, and we visit Greece very often. And I was having lots of flashbacks, different images coming into my mind of our experiences when we go to Greece and my husband's friends, and the fact that he speaks the Greek standard Greece of mainland Greece, and he can switch his dialect and recognize the different dialects of Greece, and the stigma that's associated sometimes with the Cypriot dialect, whether it's called heavy or Koriatika or Korkatika or so we've had all of that experience, and I think on a personal level, we have 4 children, because they've been brought up in a household where Greek is spoken, because you really can't get much learning of the Greek language in 3 hours on a Saturday with a couple of breaks in the community language schools, is they are beginning actually. Υπάρχει αντίστροφη μέτρηση. We're having a reverse engine action in my household. I don't know if it's a new phenomenon, where they are desperately, my children, and I say children, they range from 17 to 26 now, they're desperately trying to hold on to the Greek language and the Cypriot alongside, and they're noticing that their peers, these North London Guinea culture, actually it's so watered down a Greek or a Cypriot variety that it's becoming something different and it's beyond Greenglish now. And I think, I don't know if there is any kind of scope for subsequent research to be done on the North London, particularly Greek Cypriot diaspora, that they have totally lost Greek and Cypriot. And it seems to be going that way. Perhaps it's just my personal experience, but that's why my children are desperately trying to hang on to. And they talk about things like, oh my God, my peers, they talk about Kelen. Why do they put N's on the end of everything? But we switch dialects and accents, and this is from northern Greece, and this is from Athens. And another little story, if I may just say to it, one year we were on holiday, they were younger then, and some relatives came over from Cyprus. We were on an Athens bus, and an Athenian lady in her posh Greek turned to one of these little boys that came over from Cyprus in his heavy Cypriot. And in Greece they have this system on the buses where you buy a ticket before, don't you, and you put it into the machine on the bus. And he turned to my husband and he said, Thea, πού θα φατσίσω το εισιτήριο? And where am I gonna, how would you say, punch my ticket? And the Athenian lady, horrified, turned and said, what language is this child speaking? And my husband, who's Greek Cypriot, in his best Athenian, because that's where he studied in the University of Athens, said to her, Madam, Athenian is not the only dialect of Greek. Thank you. I'm delighted and thank you. I'm very moved by your work, and I congratulate you and wish you all the best.
Thank you. There's definitely a lot more. This is just the first attempt at explaining this, what I thought was a remarkable development, calling it slang. So yeah, there's a lot more to come towards this direction.
Well, I wish you every success with it. Congratulations. Thank you.
I want to add more to this actually, because it's so funny because there's a lot of parallels, and Katsareas has been in our team now for about nearly 3 years now, isn't it? And so Katsareas, she's very fluent Greek, and I'm Greek Cypriot. So when we're speaking in Greek, I can hardly understand her, and she can hardly understand me. So it's really quite funny. So I have to say, no, we have to speak in English. Yeah. And it's there's so many, like we have in England, we have so many regional, what do we call them, dialects and what's the phrase I'm looking for? Accents and variations in language. And in Greek and in Greek Cypriot, you have exactly the same. Yeah. And you showed that in one of your diagrams. You had the 18 regions. I thought that was spot on. But the variation that we've had in the last 30 or 40 years of being in London is there's been a change in the Greek Cypriot language and the way it works in conjunction with learning English, and you get this pidgin Greek and half Greek, half English. There's this thing about have you ever heard of Cockney Greek Cypriot?
We have all those labels that I haven't documented yet. We really need to talk to
I've actually met a woman who was a Cockney Greek Cypriot, and she spoke fluent Greek with a fluent Cockney accent, a fluent London Cockney accent. It was unbelievable. I couldn't understand a word she said.
I think we're definitely going to try and document some of these aspects with Anna. With our new project is basically we're going to create a website for people to go and input their Greenglish words.
We'll invite you all to come.
So we'll invite you all to contribute. So the end will be to create an online dictionary and also printed illustrated dictionary, because this is a wealth and a variety of Cypriot that developed here in London that is not known, it's not been documented. So that's going to be our first attempt.
And it's also dying.
And they're also very negatively stigmatized, even though these are actually very Greek words. They've been Greekified. Yeah, they have plural forms. They have all the case forms.
Genitive cases.
Yeah, they have all the cases, but people think of them negatively because they were developed by the first generation, who are of a certain sort of educational level and financial level. So they see them as the product of uneducated Cypriots who came to the UK as immigrants. So second and third generation, also because they've been exposed to the schools, they tend to prefer the proper Greek words. So it's not passon, it's lothorio, and all. But obviously we don't espouse these negative things.
I just wanted to say, I went to a talk on Monday, and it's kind of a weird parallel to this. That I went to related talks in the same week, but it was about like language varieties and multilingualism in Moscow, and there was a guy there called Denis
Zubalov.
Yeah, Zubalov. Yeah, he was talking about. I think he was talking about Pontic Greek in Moscow, and also about Georgian schools in Moscow, and about the idea that those varieties. It just struck me really interesting because he was talking about how the Pontic Greek schools, that's a different variety, and yet they were using standard Greek textbooks.
Yeah.
And so there was that kind of mismatch between those two things. I just thought it was really an interesting parallel with this as well.
Yeah, it's a small world. I met Dennis for the first time 2 weeks ago
at
a conference.
That's weird, isn't it?
And we're already talking about ways in which we can collaborate. It's a very similar case, but with another dialect that I worked on for my PhD. So
yeah. Also interesting, you talking about a Georgian school in Moscow and how the people in the Georgian school saw themselves as either Georgian, Russian, and the main term that came out was Georgian Muscovite, and so there's a kind of interesting parallel with I guess Greek Cypriot Londoner and that kind of thing, and those I just find that interesting about the variety that might exist in London that doesn't actually exist in Cyprus, and that's
there's actually a bigger divide. So diasporic varieties that are usually perceived to be frozen in time.
Yeah.
Although that's only partly true.
Yeah.
Of course, they preserve words that have fallen out of use in Cyprus.
Yeah.
So we have things like they go back to Cyprus to visit, and they use a word, and everyone will say, "We don't say that anymore. It's so old-fashioned." So there are tensions between the diaspora and the homeland.
Yeah.
So the ones from here perceive the ones in Cyprus to speak more like the Greeks now, because they've done away with a lot of basilecal words. If you ask someone from Greece like myself, of course they don't speak the way I do. But that's a perception here. And also in Cyprus they perceive the ones in London to speak like people used to speak in the 50s and 60s, like the grandmothers and grandfathers, and no one speaks like that anymore. They even have a label, they call them Charlies. Some of them.
BBC is British-born Cypriots.
Yeah, which is also used by the British-born Chinese, I know. So, it's not unique, but Charlie's is definitely unique, and some people perceive it to be derogatory, defensive. Some people are fine, but there definitely divides. It's 50 years of separate development, so it's not surprising that the languages have gone different ways.
I kind of wandered into a space that I think is like a diasporic space, but it's not in North London, it's in Central London. It's called Coffee Island. Do you know this?
Oh, yeah.
Is that Greek or is that Cypriot?
It's Greek. It's Greek. Yeah.
Okay.
But of all the
Greek
Greek coffee places, it's the I think the most welcoming towards non-Greek people. There are worse places in Central London you can walk into.
I like it.
Oh, do tell.
For me, Flo Cafe on Bond Street is the worst place you can go. If the worst image you'll form of Greek people, but don't.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Petros, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks a lot.